President Muhammadu Buhari launches $890 million global fund grants for fight against HIV/AIDS, malaria and tuberculosis in Nigeria. Vice President Yemi Osinbajo says Nigeria's infrastructure challenge will be better tackled through public-private partnership. Debt Management Office lists third sovereign sukuk on the NSE and FMDQ. Excess crude account drops to $72.4 million. This and more will be coming your way shortly. I am Musa Abubakar, your guide. Let's bring you up to speed with business development. An $890 million global fund grant for Nigeria has been launched by President Muhammadu Buhari. State House correspondent Adamu Sambo reports that the grants are to be utilized over the next 3 years in supporting the fight against HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria, as well as building resilient and sustainable systems for health in the country.
We are on track to fulfill our co-financing commitments to the Global Fund for this new funding cycle and meeting our other commitments as and when due.
Thanks to the Global Fund's continued commitment to Nigeria.
I'd like to assure Your Excellency that the Global Fund will continue to support Nigeria in responding to the pandemic and to the impact on the other diseases and the health system as a whole.
In addition to the grants mentioned above, the Global Fund, of their own free will, joined the League of Donors to support Nigeria's response to COVID-19 by donating diagnostic, case management, and infection prevention and control commodities worth 51 million United States dollars.
With the nation's excess crude account balance standing at $72.412 billion and the stabilization account balance standing at about $25 billion as at March 16th, the National Economic Council is giving consideration to the establishment of a National Monitoring and Evaluation Policy Council to reduce waste and leakages in spending in both federal and state public sector. Also, the National Center for Disease Control says the ongoing vaccination of Nigerians will continue unless there is contrary report from the World Health Organization.
The independent objective assessment of the merit of public policy strategies, program, as well as projects, and providing a source of reliable, meaningful information for the citizens in order to assess government policy.
Benefits beyond the tax to be collected if the broadband penetration is good in our state or in our locality. So the Council agreed to the resolutions, and His Excellency the Vice President intervened and also pleaded with the governors to ensure compliance in their various states.
The objective of the report is to provide a status report of the current attractiveness of states' business climates. So some of the key opportunities for change that were identified have been collated, and we're going to work with state governments starting from April to create bespoke implementation roadmaps.
Emerging technologies remain key in promoting economic growth, transformation and expansion of digital trade in Africa, according to a report on the first session of the Committee on Private Sector Development, Regional Integration, Trade, Infrastructure, Industry and Technology. The report was presented at the session on private sector development and digital economy in support of regional integration in Africa during the 39th ECA Committee of Experts of the Conference of African Ministers of Finance, Planning and Economic Development in Addis Ababa. The ECA estimates an increase of intra-African exports of industrial products by 15 to 25% in 2040 due to the AfCFTA. Bridging gaps, African countries are looking to fill the annual development financing gap of $92.8 billion to implement the 2030 Agenda, achieve Agenda 2063, and actualize the Paris Agreement, as well as respond to the COVID-19 crisis while tackling the growing levels of inequality. Now, the federal government say it is disappointed with the judgment passed by an Italian court that acquitted Shell ENI of corruption charges. Crude oil prices recorded price depreciation owing to weaker demands for days in the course of the week, but gained slightly in early trade this Friday. Let's take a trip to the commodities markets. The 53rd session of the Conference of Ministers is underway in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, TACCOM 21, with theme Africa's Sustainable Industrialization and Diversification in the Digital Era in the context of COVID-19. Early this week, we had the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, in Nigeria, and indeed, trade is the topic all over the continent. No thanks to the AfCFTA. So on the program today, we shall be looking at the continental quest to industrialize and diversify. And joining me from Ethiopia is Dr. Stephen Karingi, Director of the Regional Integration and Trade Division at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. You're welcome to the program, Mr. Stephen.
Thank you very much, Musa.
Okay, with the appointment of the first WTO DG from Africa, what are the likely wins for the continent?
Thank you. First of all, would want to join everyone else who has been celebrating the appointment of Dr. Ngozi as the Director General of the World Trade Organization. And I think the past few weeks she has been there, it has been clear that it's not going to be business as usual. So what are some of the likely wins of Africa with her leadership of the WTO? We, first of all, expect that the African perspectives are going to play a key role in informing the conversations in Geneva, as the various committees, the General Council meets, as they set their agenda and start digging into the issues, be it on the issues of fisheries, the whole issue about the TRIPS waiver for the vaccines, agriculture. We expect that the experience that she has had as a Minister of Finance and a Minister of Economic Development, her leading Gavi, all these are going to be very useful as she understands the issues in the continent very well. And of course, she's a very good diplomat. So we do expect that it is not going to be an issue of saying yes and no, but she will actually be pushing members to reach agreement so that we do not have the kind of stalemates we have seen in the past.
Okay, is Africa ready for the digital era industrialization?
Indeed, during this COVID-19, what we have observed is that Africa was actually able to jump at least 7 years. It would have taken us 7 years to be where we are. We observed, because of the lockdowns and also because of the closure of the borders, as governments were working very hard to stop transmission, we saw a lot of African SMEs actually using online platforms to keep their businesses going. We also saw that a lot of our children started receiving education services. Health services was also being delivered digitally. And all this is a demonstration that Africa is moving in the right direction in terms of digitalization. However, as the conversations have shown here in our meeting at the Committee of Experts, infrastructure, digital infrastructure remains a challenge because as everyone went online in terms of providing services and conducting their businesses, the speeds in terms of internet speeds in Africa dropped by at least 13%, which was more than twice the reduction in terms of speeds in the rest of the world because of increased demand. And this is basically an illustration that we need to invest more on the digital infrastructure.
Okay, at the ECA, what lessons did the COVID-19 brings in terms of trade?
Oh, first of all, the COVID-19, the ECA has actually been able to demonstrate its convening power of different stakeholders in terms of getting all the knowledge that you need to coordinate response to a crisis like we've been having in the continent because of COVID. For instance, we were all worried: how do we ensure that governments coordinate in terms of access to COVID supplies, or including even now to issues of vaccines? And ECA was able to create a platform that harnessed all this knowledge from governments, the private sector. So we even have Director General Ngozi, who was always a part of these conversations during these coordination meetings. So in terms of trade, what we have seen is that unless we deal with issues of trade facilitation, then a pandemic like the one we had can easily break down our supply chains. But that is on the facilitation. However, the COVID-19 has also demonstrated to us there is capacity within the continent to manufacture goods. And also we have the services capabilities to deliver those goods, as we have observed in terms of the repurposing of the production lines within the continent. So COVID-19 has shown that we do have a foundation, a strong foundation to produce, to manufacture, to add value, and we can also use digital services to conduct our businesses, including ensuring that e-commerce takes place.
Okay, what sort of cooperation did Africa create as a result of the pandemic?
First of all, and I would want to say here that the AFCFTA, when the pandemic happened, the AFCFTA had already been signed. And so the ECA was already working on what we call the AFCFTA Anchored Pharmaceutical Initiative. And the argument of the AFCFTA Anchored Initiative was that we can use the continental platform of the AFCFTA to do pooled procurement, so that if you are from a small country like Seychelles, you are able to access goods in a cheaper way. So essentially, by the time COVID-19 was happening, it was possible for us to ride on the experience of this, for Africa to work together to pool procure the COVID supplies. And even now we see Africa doing a pool procurement of the vaccines. And we have supply chains and logistics that are actually able to deliver this. So COVID-19 has actually helped us in terms of deepening our power of collaboration, our power of co-creation as a continent, of course, under the leadership of our AU institutions like the Africa CDC and the African Union Commission.
Now, is the continent closing gaps created by the barriers?
Sorry, I did not get that question.
It's the continent closing gaps created by the barriers. Trade barriers.
Oh, yes. Yeah, well, it is true that we have a widening gap. First of all, I think the question of the gaps can be looked in very many ways. I have to, at this point, first of all, highlight that what COVID-19 is doing is that it is widening the inequalities between countries and within countries. Now, the only way we can deal with these issues of inequalities is making sure that we create opportunities for all. And how do we do this? Is making sure that we make sure that the digital barriers, the infrastructure barriers that are there are actually brought down. Of course, for this to happen, you need to have the right policies. The AFCFTA provides us with this policy regime, but you also need to invest, because policies is one thing, financing policies is another thing, be it on infrastructure, be it on the institutions that you need to oversee the reduction of these barriers.
Okay, part of the resolutions at the meetings of experts is that Africa is looking for ways to fill the annual development financing gap of 92.8 billion US dollars to implement the 2030 agenda and other plans. Isn't that too ambitious?
Oh well, really, it's not as ambitious as it looks. In fact, if you listen carefully, what the ECA has been saying is that we need to see the international community agreeing to an issuance of at least $500 billion in terms of special drawing rights under the IMF. But when those SDRs are issued, we know that since they are allocated on the basis of the size of your economy, we know that Africa would only receive something like $27 billion of the $500 billion. However, if the international community agree to reallocate those special drawing rights, it is possible for Africa to realize the 100 billion or even more that you have just cited. So it's more a question of international community agreeing that we need solidarity in fighting this pandemic. And part of this solidarity will be to find financing that at least would create resilient economies. And the recovery will also require that the Africa gets adequate financing. And even as we move forward, we will need to create economies that are moving towards net zero, and you need these kinds of resources. And so the Africa's call of this, the ACA mentioning of these figures, it's not that it is not doable. It is doable if we agree on the issuance of the special drawing rights and having a reallocation mechanism so that a country like the US, which already has a stimulus package, it reallocates its special drawing rights towards the continent. We have proposed some instruments that can be used for that, like the liquidity support facility, and we believe it's something that can be done in a way that everybody benefits.
Okay, how can member states move from talk to action in trade promotion and integration as enshrined in the AFCFTA?
The first thing is, first of all, they have to ratify the agreement. Once they ratify the agreement, they have to come up with strategies for the for implementing it. Once they come up with the strategies, they have to finance these strategies, and they have to keep to the rules. If they do that, then the private sector will be able to do its part, because the realization of the AFCFTA is all about the private sector getting the opportunities to do what it does best, which is to produce, to trade, to create jobs. And that is what African countries need to do in terms of moving from talk to action.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Dr. Stephen Karingi, Director of Regional Integration and Trade Division at United Nations Economic Commission for Africa.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, moving on, is the last trading day for the week, and stocks rose early session after days of profit-taking and weak sentiments. But the gains were short-lived as the NSE All-Share Index ended the day with a 1.37% drop, standing at 38,382.39 points. Equities capitalization also closed lower at 20 trillion naira. 290 million shares worth 4.017 billion naira were traded in 4,311 deals. The financial services industry led the activity chart, dominated by the banking subsector. Top on the list, we have Zenith Bank, Unity Bank, and Guarantee Trust Bank. Now, Asia's stocks unsettled by yields and the oil market, with the Nikkei getting hit by Bank of Japan shift. Ineka Oko reports.
Asian markets mostly fell Friday. The Nikkei 225 in Japan declined 1.41% at 29,792.05, while in Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index fell 1.69%. Chinese mainland stocks also declined as the Shanghai Composite closed 1.69%. European stocks received a weak handover from Asia Pacific, where stocks mostly declined during Friday's trade following the overnight sell-off stateside. Germany DAX dipped 0.35%, London FTSE 0.67%, and CAC 40 of France 0.69%. In the U.S., the stock market on Wall Street struggled overnight, where technology stocks were hit hard, while the Dow and S&P 500 also declined. In Africa, Ghana's GSE Composite dropped 1.28% to lead losses as most stocks in the region, except Nairobi oil share, slide into negative territory. That's Global Markets Update. I'm Neka Oko.
Thank you, Neka. The Debt Management Office, DMO, says it has listed its third sovereign sukuk, 162.557 billion naira, 70-year, 11.2% Al-Ijara sovereign sukuk due 2027 on the Nigerian Stock Exchange and the FMDQ Securities Exchange. A statement by the DMO notes that the sukuk, which at the time of issuance was massively subscribed to the tune of 669.124 billion naira or 446%, was issued to finance 44 economic road projects across the 6 geopolitical zones of the country. With the listing, investors who were already holding the sukuk could trade them, while new investors have an opportunity to buy the sukuk in the secondary market. Finally, let's see how the naira is faring against other currencies. Well, that wraps this edition of Business Express. Remember to keep in touch with us. Do send in your comments, observations, and suggestions. Also, be informed that all previous episodes are available on YouTube on the NTA's channel. You can also communicate with us on Twitter, and the handle is NTA News Now, and the hashtag is BizExp. Business Express returns on Monday at 3 p.m. Be safe out there. I am Musa Abubakar.